A very good evening to all our IADVL members and others dermatologists who have logged in for this CME, which is a joint collaboration between the IADVL and the Eadv, the European Academy of Dermatology. This is a part 4 of the CME programs of the Presidential Initiative of International CME programs that the IADVL President, Dr. Rashmi Sarkar, and the IADVL EC is bringing out for all its members in this Golden Jubilee year. And we are very delighted to have you and host this program for you. We have a galaxy of stars with us, right from our President, Dr. Rashmi Sarkar. We also have Dr. Shyam Verma, who's on the international board of Eadv for the second consecutive term. We also have with us Professor Alexander, Eadv President, who will be joining us shortly, and also Dr. Carmen, Secretary General of Eadv, and Professor Christos, Eadv board member, and also Professor Adibola, who will be talking about hydroargenitis. So we have a very promising schedule, and we are sure to have a lot of take-home messages, and we are sure that it will enrich all of you in your practice and also in the academic knowledge. I would now request our President, Dr. Rashmi Sarkar, to deliver the welcome address. Before that, I would like to introduce and give a background. Professor Dr. Rashmi Sarkar is the Director Professor of Lady Hardinge Medical College, New Delhi. She's also the second Lady President of the Indian Association of Dermatologists, Venereologists, and Nephrologists. And she's one of my predecessors in the sense she's been the first Secretary General of the IADVL. She's the chair of the International Mentorship Committee of the International Society of Dermatology. And also she's the Vice President of the Asian Society of Pigment Research. And she's been on the editorial board of numerous journals, and she's also received the Members Making Difference Award from the American Academy of Dermatology. With these words, I welcome you all once again and request our President to deliver the welcome address and the presidential note. Over to you, Madam.
Thank you so much, Dinesh. Hello.
You're very much audible.
Is there an echo?
There was, now there isn't.
That's very strange here. So good evening, everyone, and a very warm namaste from India. And I'd like to say that I'm delighted today because the tag of this year, every year we have a different motto or a tag of the IADVL, and this year being the 50th year of IADVL, it happens to be 50 years of IADVL, building up future leaderships and international collaborations. So that was the motto. Keeping up with that, as one of the presidential projects, I had decided that since I have served on so many different committees in different global societies, and we've learned a lot from them actually, while attending their meetings from so many different senior and legendary figures, why not bring it back to India, what these societies have to offer to all our members in IADVL. Thinking of that, we decided to launch this International Dermatology Society CME program so that some of the important dermatology societies come in these webinars and showcase some of their speakers, and we learn about the societies. The common member who's there in IADVL learns a lot about these societies, whether they want to become a member in the future, when they want to avail any of the other things which are available educationally from these societies. Starting with that, this is the 4th in the series. We've already had an international webinar with the Asian Society of Pediatric Dermatology. The second one we had was the Women's Dermatologic Society. The third was the ILDS. And I'm extremely happy to say that the 4th one happens to be the IADVL Eadb webinar, which is today. Let me tell you, out of all the different societies, conferences that the IADVL members or the Indian members like going to, definitely Eadv is right on the top. Besides the American Academy of Dermatology, it is Eadv and the International Society of Dermatology. Now that is because perhaps Eadv has a lot to offer to its international members. That is what I feel. I became a member just, a few years back, but I've been following up. I do know what all Eadv has to offer. Years back, as a youngster, I had heard about the Imrik Sarkani scholarship, which is there. It's very famous, in India. There are just so many winners out here. And even I tried my luck because I really wanted to get that. For some reason, I did not really get the Imrik Sarkani award, but yes, it struck. So I would follow up about the EADV regularly. And what I see is that it has just so much to offer to the member. Perhaps that is the reason that we have so many members from India. One is that it has conferences which are very attractive educationally. You have a very good program which is very varied. Speakers from Europe as well as the rest of the globe. The second thing is the attraction of Europe. It's right on the top. Beautiful places which keep changing every year. I think that does a lot to attract the common IADVL member, to go there. Third thing is it has several other things to offer. It has diversified over the years. It has changed with time. So it has things like the podcasts, which I really like because I love podcasts and we have them now in IADVL. It also has, I think, a robust leadership program in place besides the AD. It has so many scholarships and fellowships. And I'm delighted to say that even in the few years that I became a member, I was able to get a scholarship, which not a scholarship, but a fellowship, which totally waived off my registration fee for attending, one of the meetings. That is delightful, for a person who's just joined. So I think with all these educational and international collaborative opportunities that the EADV has to offer, definitely it should be very high on the list of our members if you're looking to be a member. Because I always tell the younger people, become the member of at least 1 or 2 international societies, keep following up. As you earn more money in your job, become a member of more societies, but pick and choose, what you like. So that is EADV for you. Now regarding IADVL, as you know, IADVL is the second largest dermatology organization in the world. We are very proud of it. We have 14,000 members plus. This includes our younger members. What can IADVL also do to collaborate with the EADV? Well, as I said before, perhaps we could look forward to more such educational opportunities. IADVL could do programs for the EADV, provided we have them on your calendar, we could do something which is especially unique from India, from our Indian speakers to the EADV. We could bring education live. We can also offer a sister society program in the forthcoming Dermacon International, which is going to be in Mumbai from 26th to 28th of February. I think you must have already received the letter, but it's very important that you are a part of our sister society program. And we could continue probably having that in IADVL Dermacons even further if we talk about it, we have a proposal. Most importantly, research. I think this is just the right time, to collaborate and have these delightful, research programs where we could have the European skin as well as, dark skin patients like from India. We could learn a lot from each other, regarding the skin of color. I'm very thankful to Dr. Shyam Verma, who happens to be the chair of the International Lesion Committee, an important committee in IADVL, which we've just started a few years back, who's also the international board member of EADV 2 times in a row. I think that's very nice. He's been very helpful because I told him that, can we have an EADV one webinar? And I think he's collaborated and he's got this on the table. And that's the good part of all our IADVL members who are known internationally. Thank you, Dr. Shyam Verma. And I'd like to thank Dr. Alexander Strategos. We know of him as an academician, but it's been delightful that he's agreed. And also to Dr. Carmen Salvestro. I know her for some time, I've known her even before she was I believe the second secretary of the EADV. But we know that she's a worker and we met through the Women's Dermatologic Society. And it's very nice to see her in this position. I believe she is one of the key persons responsible for getting this collaboration together. A warm welcome to you. And also to Professor Dr. Christos Zoboulis, I think people in India do know him because, he's delivered so many lectures. And again, it'll be really nice to listen to him about hidradenitis suppurativa. I'll introduce him more later. And Dr. Adebola Ogunbi, who's a friend. I know her a long time since we are part of the International Society of Dermatology Mentorship Committee. We've worked together. So we'll be hearing more about rosacea from her. With that in place, I think I'm now going to hand over the session to Dr. Shyam Verma. And let me just introduce him. There is probably a lot about him, but it would take up, I think, more than half an hour. He has so many achievements, but I'm just going to, in very brief, introduce him. He's a very well-known consultant dermatologist in Vadodara, Gujarat. And he's also the chairperson, as you know, of the International Liaison Cell of IADVL for a few years now. He's also the international board member of Eadv twice in a row. And of course, he has so many publications, to his credit. So over to you, Dr. Shyam Verma, because he'll be taking up the first part, which is about the Eadv. And I hand over the program now to you.
Thank you, President Dr. Sarkar. Welcome, everyone, especially is Professor Strategos. Has he entered the group? Or I do not see him. We should have him with us soon. We have, of course, Professor Carmen Salvastru from Bucharest, Romania. She's professor of dermatology in the University of Medicine and has a special interest in pediatric dermatology. She seems to be an absolute multitasker because she also, over and above juggling the Eadv Secretary General's position with her job, she also publishes and has just come out with a book on skin and the heart, which she just shared with us. And we have the other person who is, unfortunately, I do not see here, and that is the president of the Eadv. That's Professor Alexander Strategos from Athens, Greece. And we were hoping that we would start a little conversational session for about 20 minutes since we are a little behind time. So my time to ask Naveen or Dinesh, is Professor Strategos on board?
No, sir, not yet.
Not yet, sir.
He's not yet. Well,
Not
in
yet.
that case, I think it would be appropriate to start just to be in time. We can always start with Professor Salvastru to keep things informal. If everybody doesn't mind, we are going to call each other by first name. I'm sure nobody is going to be very, very formal here. I'm going to be dealing in my part with the two administrative heads of Eadv. Of course, Rashmi will be doing the honors of introduction and everything of Professor Christos Zoubulis and Professor Adebola Ogunbi. I would have allowed to speak more about Professor Christos Zoubulis because I happen to know him probably more than quite a few people, and he's a legendary professor who
you are welcome. You can do that actually.
No, please go right ahead. And
yeah,
but
right.
Anyway, his talk is going to speak more about his erudition. So let that happen at its own time. A few lines that I do want to stress upon include the fact that, and I'm kind of echoing the sentiment of Rashmi in what she said about the plans and the dreams and the aspirations of IADVL, and would like to thank her for actually initiating this intense kind of interaction between various international societies with IADVL, so that it works to the advantage of both. It's not just one association that is gaining, of course, our parent organization being IADVL, but what we really want to bring to the table is a kind of an import-export activity, if I may use that phrase, that it's not just a simple question of importing academic excellence from Europe, which we all are very much aware of, but we also want to export our academic excellence to Europe and beyond. And I have been involved in these activities in the past. I have, had several sessions in Eadv, which I have chaired and organized, especially on dermatosis in the dark skin. I've been on these positions of international board member of the Eadv on for two consecutive terms. I've been with the International Society of Dermatology for the past four-year terms. Right now, serving as a vice president of the ISD, and I'm also chairing the global outreach task force of the ISD. So this is what we really want to do. We want to have a two-way traffic. We want a interactive kind of a relationship with right now Eadv, since we are concentrating on Eadv just now. So with this, I would like to welcome Carmen to say some of the things that she finds useful to share with IADVL members. And over to you, Carmen.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to connect my colleagues from India for so many reasons. One of them being the fact that I come from Romania, which is the country where the highest number of DAD members come from. And my colleague from India represented the highest in numbers community on the part of the international members of the Eadv. So there is a first link between us. Before we start our, let's say, conversation about Eadv and how can we strengthen our relationship, allow me to take 4 minutes of your time and to present Eadv in a nutshell. So I will share the screen, and I hope this will be done quickly and efficiently for everyone to be able to watch a short video.
As a young dermatologist, I really wanted to use research to improve the care of my patients, and I found that the most exciting space for this for me was in rare genetic skin research.
We are together because we want to build the future of European dermatology together.
You have to go to the Eadv congresses to know what's happening in the world of dermatology.
The history of the Eadv accounts for an impressive list of accomplishments. It started as a small group of 20 visionary founders. It has become now a large professional organization with more than 7,000 members from 100+ countries around the world. The Eadv is best known for its annual congress, but it provides much more than that. It organizes courses for residents and specialists, it promotes research, it promotes clinical care standards through its journals and courses, and it helps young colleagues develop their skills. So in a nutshell, the Eadv is a lifelong companion for learning and development for our members.
In Florence, we had the first Eadv, great big conference.
The two first congresses were very successful, the one in Florence and the other in Athens, with more than 3,000 and 4,000 participants respectively.
For me, the Eadv is a continuous source of learning and inspiration. I remember presenting my first abstract as a graduate medical student in one of the first Eadv congresses. One of my first publications was at the GADV, and my initial scientific collaborations were forged by my participation at EADV meetings. So in whatever stage you are, a resident or a specialist, an academic or a practitioner, a researcher or a clinician, the EADV is a wonderful resource to help you optimize your experience and expertise, to help develop skills, and to share your ideas with the dermatovenerology community. One of the major strengths of the EADV is its ability to consistently improve in response to change and to our members' needs. The response of the EADV to the pandemic, for example, was to revisit its educational strategy and to create wonderful, innovative e-learning tools as the basis of its educational courses.
Right now, there are over 100 hours of learning material available for members and non-members. And just to give you an idea, this year we had over 30,000 views coming from all over the world for this e-learning. And this is just one small aspect of the e-learning, because we also have podcasts, which are great because they are more personal.
The EADV aspires to be the leading community that furthers the knowledge of healthcare professionals and advocates in the field of dermatology venereology. We're a value-based organization that cherishes its history and tradition, that builds upon past experiences, that works with openness and collegiality, and that leads into new paths that can make our patients' outcomes better.
If you want to keep up to date and deliver the newest therapies, you want to hear about them from the experts. And where are they? They're at the IADV.
Here we are back live. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share in a few minutes, let's say, the core activities and the core values that the IADV has. So now I'm open for the dialogue, and I'm really happy that Professor Zuboulis is together with us today as a board member as well for 2 terms, which is the all that we can get at the IADV as a board member, 2 terms, each term being of 3 years, so it's the maximum. And also as chair of the Honors and Awards Committee, which is one of the most important committees in the IADV, and also the newsletter editor-in-chief of the IADV. So I'm really happy that he is here today with us as well in this capacity, because of course we all know his scientific achievements as well.
So can I shoot the first question, Carmen?
Yes, of course.
Let me just ask you a very broad-based question. We would, as you very correctly said, probably India is not probably, now it's confirmed that India has the maximum number of international members of EADV. We constitute the maximum number. If I'm not mistaken, it's 160 at the moment. And probably it's less now than before, just maybe a few less because of the COVID and the interruption of meetings, in-person meetings for the past 2 years. That may have impacted the membership, but I'm sure that people will be joining in large numbers in the coming years. Now, Carmen, what I would like to know from you as somebody who's hands-on, can you elaborate on some of the educational activities that EADV does, which would attract international members?
Well, there are many things that we really want to improve at the Eadv. Eadv is a community member-centered. I remember why many years ago I joined the Eadv as a very young dermatologist coming from Eastern Europe, so not many opportunities before the 1990s. And for me, the most important thing personally was the journal, the resource center that the Eadv provided for the dermatologists, which is a virtual library, which includes a virtual library. Of course, the Congress, at that time, there was not Spring Symposium yet. That started in 2003, so some years later. And also the opportunity of networking, which is also very important for a young dermatologist or a young physician. So I think these reasons are still valid reasons and solid reasons today for everybody all over the world who would like to be part of a community, who is really preoccupied to improve the quality of life, not only of the patients, but also of the doctors. We can add now many other reasons, like the opportunity to travel to Europe for the congresses or for the symposia, like the opportunity to attend courses and in person, which is also an opportunity. And the members have this possibility. As a member, you have priority in all this. So I think mostly from the education part, we have many things to offer. And as Paola Pasquali mentioned in the video clip that we have just watched, there are courses, there are webinars, the podcast. The podcast is such a wonderful tool for everybody. We can use it in any moment of the day. We can listen to it. We can also comment on it. We are able to ask for various topics for the future. And yeah, education was for me the first reason to join Eadv, and then the opportunity to network with wonderful people like you here today and all of us. So.
Thank you, Carmen. That's a very comprehensive answer as to what would attract international members. I'd like to reiterate something that you said, and this is more for the benefit of the people who are attending this webinar. You know, I look at the number of journals that you have free access to as a member of the EADV. It's amazing. And I don't know how many people realize the value of access, free access to almost 6 journals, and not just 6 top rated journals of the world, but also many textbooks of dermatology. And which if you started subscribing to, it would cost literally thousands of euro if you wanted all that to happen, to come to your desktop, which EADV membership gives access to just in that annual subscription that we have, membership subscription that we renew every year. And I think that's a small investment for what we are getting as members. That's one thing. I believe there is also there are added benefits if you are young, especially if you are a resident. And if you're a resident international member, there are some wonderful incentives in terms of membership. Would you be able to tell us just a little more about that?
Well, it is true. We like to give the young colleagues more and more opportunities, not only to attend the Congress and the symposia, but also to be somehow part of, let's say, what the community wish to build. So we would be happy to see as many residents as possible accessing the scholarships, for instance, to be part. And I think that nobody would mind, and I would be very glad to hear from Professor Zuboulis, because he managed for 4 years all these possibilities that were granted and are still granted to the residents and young dermatologists. He also realized a very important, let's say, step up by getting the possible financial resources to have many such possibilities to travel, and also to enjoy the benefits of a membership for 1 year for all these colleagues that are able to qualify for this scholarship. There are also clinical and research fellowships that EADV, on a basis of criteria that are in place, EADV selects the candidates. And all this and a lot of other things that are listed on the EADV website. So don't be shy, just go to the EADV, on the EADV website, eadv.org, and all these details are there, who, when, and how is able to apply, and for which of our programs. Being an EADV member gives priority to almost all of these programs, and to scholarship, fellowship, and so on, but also to the educational programs. So to visit the EADV website is also a very good thing. And you mentioned the journals, 17 in number, and
17.
also 17, and also the textbook, 21 in number. It means indeed a useful resource for our colleagues who do not have the privilege to have access through their universities or teaching hospitals, as it happens in some countries in the world. But we have seen from the surveys that those countries able to provide such opportunities are in a small number. So the higher numbers are the countries where people like me, for instance, work and live, and we really need access to education and to resources.
Absolutely. And here it's an EADV membership, irrespective of whether you are in private practice or you are part of the university or a government hospital. It gives you, that membership assures you of access to so much of educational literature that you cannot even imagine of having on your own with your personal expenses or with your personal resources. Maybe can I ask this question to Professor Zuboulis, maybe to give his views, because he's a widely traveled, extremely well-known professor and has multiple international collaborations all over the world, and who has been, who has been working as a board member for so many years. We would like to know your views, Christos, on how to enhance the association between IADVL and EADV.
Thank you very much, Siam. Professor Salavastru has presented in an excellent way all the opportunities the EADV offers, not only to the European members, but also to our international members, whom we widely respect. And he has done a lot of work to promote and present all, structure all these activities. But I think every day has another day in the future, and we can always improve. We are in a very good level, but if you try to stay at the same level, you lose. You have continuously to improve. So I think it is time now to think about different possibilities that together the Indian Dermatological Society and the EADV could develop. And one of the things that I was thinking over the period, seeing so many young Indian dermatologists applying for the Imre Sakani fellowship, incredible numbers, and of course it was impossible for us I would like too much to give all of them prizes, high educated people from India, but there is a limited number. So few colleagues could receive these fellowships and scholarships. So I was thinking that something that could happen, but this is something that has to be discussed in the future among the two societies, is to organize initially very small, limited, but very promising system that a common selection of residents from both sides, from Europe to India and from India to Europe, will go to a department and get this feeling of joining activities on special programs. We have to find out which are the special programs that interest India and, of course, Europe. I can give you a very simple example, the work we made together, looking for the prevalence of dermatomycosis in India. And I can tell you, this problem starts to happen in Europe too. So it's nothing that stays only in one part of the world. So there are many other things, of course, that we can think together. And I think Professor Lavastro, as General Secretary, is the right person to take these ideas and discuss in the board so that we start having a structured cooperation. I think this will help a lot. And as you can imagine, as a European, I would love to have the Indian society cooperating with the European society first, and not to the other societies. Not that I want to exclude any society, but as a European, I would very much be thrilled to work together with you on a structured way.
Wonderful. Thank you. With Rashmi's presidential mission of forging strong international relationships, I'm sure we are all committed to making this happen. And I know that Carmen is going to be very active as usual and will, in a typical positive spirit, will support any good activity that we can convince each other of being able to do and execute. So hopefully this will be something really worthwhile to look forward to, because one of the things that I have felt over the years of this kind of international interaction is that we in India have so much expertise to share. Many of our colleagues are really very good in what they do, academically, professionally. They are good communicators, they share well, they mean well. And I would love to see a day when India contributes more and when I use the word import-export, I would love to see a day when India is able to export more over the years. So that is something that I'm sure will happen over the years if we are all consciously working towards this common goal, including small things like the podcasts. Rashmi has brought podcasts into the IADVL activity mainstream. She's the one who actually thought it up after seeing it happening in other associations. And I think that's one of the best things that happened. And probably we can bring some podcasts to you.
We can open it out also to the Eadv members.
Absolutely.
It's a very simple process. Why don't we do that? They're also nice. This
can be opened up for interested Eadv members if rules allow. And now that you've got the presidential nod that IADVL does not mind sharing, probably this is something worth thinking about.
Definitely. There are so many ways that we can start. I would also tell you, for instance, that the Eadv committees and task forces welcome the members of the Eadv from all over the world. So this is also an opportunity to start contributing. And also, it is something that started some years ago, in 2009 to be precise. For some reason, it lasted probably for 5 years. It was a Eadv India initiative that probably the people who are here today are aware of it. This program, which, as I said, started in 2009, was meant to last for 3 years. It was a success. there are many details of that program that we can review, and maybe we can consider upgrading and updating it. The title was Eadv India Knowledge Exchange Initiative. So that program for some years ago, it's probably a very good start for us. And also all the other educational opportunities like the webinars, the webcast, and also maybe applying for committee members and task force members.
That would be great, yes. Rashmi, you remember the meetings that used to be held? They used to call them the best of Eadv here?
Absolutely. You know, I'll tell you something interesting, that you had these lovely programs, Eadv program, you know, focusing on India. I think you were also there, Dr. Shyam. You're probably conducting them, or I don't know, something like that. And it was a dream. I thought that I will go to Eadv, maybe get to speak in one of these programs. Before I could do that, somehow they stopped. So I'm so glad that Carmen has brought it up. I think during your tenure, you must make sure we will send a proposal that we reintroduce it back again. It was fantastic. I had that in mind. It's never too late in the day for all those people who thought that the program should be back. Similarly, I suggest that we will send the proposal that we should have one with IADVL and Eadv every year. Let it be a two-way traffic. Yeah. It works very well, you know, for us.
Yeah.
So it seems we have a plan.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have a plan. We have a good plan. And like the Americans say, go for it.
It's really, really a pleasure to see the openness which with Eadv is welcomed, and the vice versa. So I'm really happy that we could be part of this meeting today. And I thank you so much for this. It's a really, really an honor and a really important opportunity for the Eadv to develop.
We would like to reciprocate the same sentiment. Thank you both, Carmen and Christos, for representing Eadv and for these really nice, forward-looking, positive discussion. And now I think it's 7:45 here, and probably we can move on to the talks, which are going to form the backbone of this webinar. We have two experts here. So over to Rashmi to introduce both Christos and Adebola. And we look forward to getting educated in both hidradenitis suppurativa and rosacea in dark skin, both being pertinent problems in India as well. I remember Christos was sharing something very, very interesting, which I told a couple of people here as well. When we met in Ljubljana, he was saying that one of the studies that he was doing on hidradenitis suppurativa in Singapore, they found that most of a majority of the patients with HS were actually dark-skinned people from Indian ancestry. And that's really, in a way, not surprising, because now we are seeing more and more cases of hidradenitis suppurativa, and there is more and more awareness within our Indian dermatology community. And in fact, there are people who are now gaining a lot of expertise in this area amongst our colleagues. So Rashmi, please do the honors now, and thank you, Rashmi, for this great initiative. It was great to be a part of it.
So thank you so much again. First of all, Dr. Shyam Verma, and also Dr. Carmen. You know, it was wonderful because I had in mind that this is going to happen. These are the question and answers, but I think we gained much more than what I had in mind. So that is the beautiful part of this interaction. And I look forward to this continuing. I'm there for only 1 year. I have 6 months to go. But I'm sure that in the 6 months, we'll be able to establish something for all the future dermatologists in India. So thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. So I'm going to carry on now with the scientific part, which I'm sure everybody is also looking forward to. We have none other than Professor Christos Zouboulis with us, and everybody knows him because at least I may not know him like Dr. Verma knows, but I have read his publications. That is how, we know academicians. And he's a full professor of dermatology, venereology, and allergology at the Brandenburg Medical School, Theodor Fontane, and the Faculty of Health Sciences, Brandenburg, and director of the departments of dermatology, venereology, allergology, and immunology at Dessau Medical Center, Germany. I hope I got all the pronunciations right, And he has so many other affiliations. Most importantly, he has so many other things in the EADV, like he serves as the editor of the EADV News, is president of the European Hydroargenitis Suppurativa Foundation. That's really important because we know how people are disabled with Hydroargenitis Suppurativa, the way they disable a person's quality of life. So that is why that was one reason that we wanted to hear about this topic. His major areas of research are the pathophysiology of the sebaceous gland and of the associated skin disease like acne, hidradenitis suppurativa, skin aging, and rare disease. Of course, he's highly published with an EDGE index of 109, IF more than 2,600 citations, more than 44,000, and his research has been recognized through numerous scientific awards like the Eadv Research Fellowship, Oscar Jans Major Prize of the German Dermatologic Society, amongst others. Well, he's definitely one of the dream academicians. It would be something that people should aspire to be. So we are really looking forward to hearing about hidradenitis suppurativa from you, Professor. So I'd like to invite you and thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of this very wonderful initiative for IADVL. Over to you, Professor.
Dr. Azmi, Dr. Siam, Dr. Dines, thank you so much for the honorable invitation to be a part of your Golden Jubilee. This is the best honor I can imagine for my good friends from India. Since we discussed about the old program of the IADV, Indian Dermatological Society, I have to recognize Professor Raj Kuba, who introduced me during these events to India, making me loving the country and its people, and especially the incredible level of high education in medicine that I have experienced during my journeys there. I had the opportunity later on to educate in some fields Indian dermatologists, and I know what a feeling it is to have friendships that will stay for years. So I'm very happy today to present one of the fields of my personal scientific interest, and I would like to start saying that hidradenitis suppurativa is a disease that actually has been over many years without any home, a homeless disease, because nobody was interested actually to be associated with it. And it is dermatologists that overtook the responsibility to study this disease. And now it becomes one of the most prominent developing diseases in medicine, with currently 115 clinical studies going on, and most of them led by dermatologists. So if we look a little bit the history, we're going to see what kind of development this disease has experienced in a very short period of time. It was 1982 when Anderson has said that this is an infrequent inflammatory process that begins as an infection in the apocrine sweat glands. We can consider it today as a dermatological archaeology. So 2006, the first worldwide meeting with only 33 scientists in the South, you can imagine, in the first World Congress, has defined the disease as a chronic inflammatory recurrent skin disease of the terminal hair follicle that occurs in area that is rich in apocrine sweat glands. So we have a clearly dermatological disease of the hair follicle. If we look how science has developed over these years, it is very unexpected was going on. Until 2015, 2005, we had a very few publications. We see here in the 5 years to 2001 to 5, 168 publications, including case reports. And since the first World Congress, we have an exponential increase, and this will go upward. So the interest is huge, and almost 80% of these publications come from dermatological hands and minds. Now, why this disease is important? Let's start with the pathogenesis, which is complex. If we look what is going on, looking series of histological preparations, we're going to see that mainly two areas, two factors play a role in the development of the disease. First, we have changes of the epithelium, especially of the terminal follicles. What you see in red are epithelial cells, and they are mostly of them cells of the hair follicle. But we also have inflammation, and this is with green. So two special areas of interest concentrate in the development of new therapeutic compounds. This is these early changes in the epithelium where the keratinocyte become almost a professional inflammatory cell by sending inflammatory signals, and then special cells occurring around the follicle and attacking the follicle as if it was an external enemy. Looking in the clear effort to find specific molecules as biomarkers, we get the first disappointment. We have a clear upregulation of inflammatory molecules in the apocrine gland-rich skin, which are protective actually for the follicle. If we go now to the hydroargenitis suppurativa involved skin, what we see is nothing else but an increase of the expression of the same biomolecules. So we don't have a specific marker that increases in a qualitative way, but we have a simple upregulation, a huge upregulation of inflammation in a quantitative manner. If we now try to somehow understand the pathways, we come out with several pathways that play a role. First, the cytokines, which include interleukin 1, interleukin 17, and interleukin 36, and more other. The innate immune response related genes get upregulated, chemokines, a lot of antimicrobial peptides expressed in the keratinocytes, immunoglobulins, and B-cell response related genes. Well, if we take and make a worldwide map, it's like a football, an open football sometimes I say, looking the different pathways that get upregulated, we come out with regulation of the immune system as expected, but especially neutrophil degranulation. We see an upregulation of signal transduction. We see also developmental biology changes. This means differentiation of keratinocytes, and we see metabolism of proteins, especially insulin-like growth factor 1 upregulation associated with obesity. Now, hydroargenitis suppurativa can be classified into the group of inflammatory skin diseases. If we'd like to compare it with other diseases that we have more knowledge, like psoriasis, then we find a major difference. While in psoriasis, there are clear differences between the involved skin and the non-involved skin, as you can see at the left. In hidradenitis suppurativa, this difference is not so clear. So we have upregulation of different biomolecules in both normal-looking skin and disease skin. So we don't have this clear separation that we have experienced from the psoriatic plaque. Getting into genes, we were thrilled at the beginning to find out that there are indeed gene molecules that get being mutated in hidradenitis. We have found 59 highly-penetrant mutations detected in the chromosome 19p13, and among them, especially ones in the gamma secretase complex, and mostly in the nicastrin gene in different families, especially from China. However, no single mutation is enough to induce clinical signs of HS. So we cannot speak about a monogenic disease. And no mutations induce dominant activation. This means we need much more upregulation in order to see a disease than simply having a mutation, even if it's expressed. Now, looking further to understand why these mutations may play a role, we find that the mutations are associated with immune reaction. So we have an upregulation, an easier upregulation of TNF-alpha and interleukin-10 levels, and especially the NICA3 mutations in familial hidradenitis suppurativa, which is a small part of the disease, induce keratinocyte proliferation and abnormal differentiation. And through that we have upregulation of inflammatory signaling pathways. Another point that is very important is that the clinical picture of the disease is also complex. If we try to phenotypize the disease, we come with very different systems of classification depending on what we're asking. We have genetic forms like the sporadic, which is the majority, the familial, which is more common, interestingly, in the Northern Europe than in the Southern Europe and other areas of the world. And we have syndromic hidradenitis, especially in the syndromes summarized under PAS, PAPAS, and SAPAS. If we look at the activity, and I'm going to go further on this because it's very important, we have an inflammatory and non-inflammatory variant. If we look at the clinical phenotypes, we can differentiate the disease in axillary mammary, follicular, and gluteal. And if we go to the age classification, we have disease mostly in adolescents and the absolute majority in adults. I come to the point I told you before, trying to differentiate inflammatory versus non-inflammatory phenotypes. And you see at the lower panel, the classification after Harley, stage 1, 2, and 3. And Harley, an American dermatosurgeon, has tried to decide by this classification if the disease needs surgical treatment or not. Harley stage 1, no surgery. Harley stage 2, local surgery. And Harley stage 3, radical surgery. But if you look the upper panel, where do you think you can make surgery? What about Harley 2? Are you going to excise all the area of inflammation? But what about Harley 3? Not only you have a huge area of excision, but also you have 80% recurrences. So you cannot use surgery in the inflammatory phenotype. You can only use it in the non-inflammatory phenotype if this non-inflammatory phenotype is indeed non-inflammatory. And what I mean, I'm going to show you in a few minutes. Of course, if you have such difficulties, you have to try to simplify the criteria for diagnosis. And this is something done by the European Hidradenitis Suppurativa Foundation, where we try to use simplified diagnostic criteria. You can see here written outbreaks of boils. This is a word that patients use usually during the last 6 months with a minimum of 2 boils, at least at 1 or more of the 5 different location options. So the classical locations are the axilla, the inguinal region, the genitourinary region, the buttocks, and the submammary and intramammary area, inframammary area in female. With this, we have 97% accuracy. This means such a patient sent to dermatologist has the possibility only of 3% of wrong diagnosis, of overdiagnosis, and this will be covered by the follow-up. So what we want is that the general practitioners, as far as see this very simplified criteria, they send the patient to the specialized dermatologist. Now, if we discuss about hidradenitis worldwide, and Dr. Siam has said what's going on, for example, in Singapore, patients of Indian ancestry make 10% of the population and 90% of the patients with hidradenitis. So you have to be specialized to know what is going on. And what is the big difference, and especially something that European dermatologists have to learn to differentiate and diagnose, is that inflammation is not so obvious in dark skin. Of course, what we see with darker skin may be inflammation, but we have to learn to differentiate hyperpigmentation from inflammation. And this is not easy at the European eyes. The clinical evaluation is also difficult. If we take psoriasis, it's very clear. We have psoriatic plaque with very sharp borders. But these borders are not sharp in hidradenitis. It's an inflammation, a deep inflammation. We see only the top of the iceberg. So you don't see all the lesions deep skin. And this is very clear in the histology. If we look at psoriasis, we see that the inflammation is at the upper dermis, and of course, as we know, also in the epithelium. While if we see in hidradenitis, the inflammation is at the perifollicular area and very deep in the dermis. Now, of course, we can try to find out what is going deep. We can use ultrasonography, may defining the real lesions. As you can see here, what we see is not what we have. But how easy is to do this in the everyday practice, and how much experience you need to get the exact borders? It's not something that can happen if you have hundreds of patients. And on the other side, you can use thermography, which allows you to see the depth of inflammation. And this is what I told you before. Apparently, non-inflammatory lesion at the left, at the axilla of a patient. So you can send this patient to surgery because you believe there is no inflammation. And you do the thermography, and you find that despite the fact that you don't see the inflammation, there is a lot of inflammation at the depth. So if you make here surgery, you will have probably a very high prevalence of recurrence. And the other thing is, we discussed about Halley classification, widely used, and has been wrongly also assessed as a possibility of detecting severity. But if you see here, these are patients fulfilling the criteria of Halley 3, the wide inflammation with scarring. But you very clearly decide by looking at these pictures that these three patients have a clearly different level of severity. So we don't have a severity evaluation by using the Halley score. We need something else. In the procedure of developing drugs, and you know that adalimumab, and TNF-alpha inhibitor, has been registered for the treatment of the disease in the year 2015-2016. There was a system evaluated named HiSCR, Hydroargenitis Suppurativa Clinical Response, which is here not a linear classification of severity, but defines a binomial asset of criterion. So either you fulfill the criteria requested or you do not fulfill. And also this has been widely used as a system, as an outcome measure for severity. But if you look very carefully, what this system says, if you have a patient with 4 non-draining tunnels, 20 inflammatory nodules, and 20 abscesses, and you treat him. And then this patient comes back and he has no abscesses, no inflammatory nodules, and 5 draining tunnels. This patient is not successful treatment because from 4 draining tunnels, he became 5 draining tunnels. And when does it happen? It happens especially at the patients who really need treatment, the patients with many draining tunnels, with high severity, that may, on the day that they come to be seen and evaluated, in their many non-draining tunnels, they change from 4 to 5 draining tunnels. And then this patient is not allowed to get further treatment. So this does not work, and we need better outcome measures. So the European Hydroargenitis Suppurativa Foundation worked over 3 years to develop a system that can be used in different ways. First, as a linear severity classification system. This means the major lesions, inflammatory nodule, classified as a raised 3D round infiltrated lesion more than 1 centimeter diameter, abscesses, and draining tunnels. And they get a dynamic score pointing of 1 for the nodule, 2 for the abscess, and 4 the draining tunnel. So the amount of points in the entire body gives you the severity, and you can linearly classify the disease if you have an improvement by treatment or not in a very quick clinical manner. But you also can classify the decision for treatment. If you can say you have a mild disease if you have 1 to 3 points, moderate 4 to 10, and severe over 11 on the entire body. And since the administrative authorities and many industrial friends want to have a dichotomous binomial system, the IHS4 can be used as IHS4 55 with a 55% reduction of IHS score versus baseline, indicating 50% of improvement. So this is a linear mathematical system that can be evaluated at the 50% level, and this is validated and will be published soon. Now, what are our targets? If we look, we have adalimumab, a TNF inhibitor, in the meantime without patent, and there are a lot of biosimilar molecules in the market, where the criterion high score, as we discussed, has been fulfilled significantly, and this was the reason why the drug has been registered. So we have clearly an improvement of the patient, but by this score, the real improvement is not counted, but we see the fulfillment of the criterion, and this was considered as enough. Very clear data. Now, looking on the long term, especially the incidence of flares, we see that if we treat long term without increasing the side effects, we keep the flares low. So we have a drug that works, which is not a panacea. It's not the drug that heals, but we have a drug that works. Of course, we need much more in this field in the future. In order to understand what we need new studies. And this work by Hodge and co-workers from France was the first to show that we have two different aspects of pathophysiology at the molecular level. First, we have the antimicrobial response from the keratinocytes. And the second, we have a psoriasis molecular phenotype, psoriasis-like molecular phenotype, indicating the inflammation induced by the professional inflammatory cells. Looking a little bit deeper and localizing this knowledge, we have developed a system to evaluate the keratinocyte assessment of involvement in disease. And we have found that the keratinocytes produce the microbial peptides that are upregulated, especially in the follicular epithelium. And you can see here this follicular upregulation, which is very characteristic for the disease, especially of molecules like this, the S100 proteins, where are calcium-dependent domains at the chromosome 1, and also the human beta-defensin. So it's very clear that we have molecules that have an antimicrobial activity, but influence the differentiation of the keratinocyte. This is why also the serpins are upregulated. Then a second question we had is, does obesity play a role? It's very much openly discussed, and smoking. And in order to find a way to differentiate that, we compared smokers, obese smokers, with lean non-smokers. And you see what happens: obese smokers, lean non-smokers, obese smokers, and lean non-smokers, and the different molecules that are important. And what comes out is that interleukin-17 receptor is the molecule that makes the big difference. This means it upregulated in obese smokers. This means this patient needs much more treatment molecule to block the receptor, higher concentrations, and this is why probably these patients are the ones that respond less to the classical concentrations of the drugs. Now, where we are in the future, where we are and where we go. We have a lot of information from molecular studies regarding the different modifications of the differentiation of the follicle and the involvement of inflammatory cells. We have translated them in possible drugs. So we have targeting, especially nowadays, interleukin-17 alpha, interleukin-17 alpha and F, and in the near future, interleukin-36 receptor and the JAK pathway. Many more molecules, of course, are under clinical studies, but this will be probably the areas that will present earlier than others as possible drugs. Let's see here how this can work. And unfortunately, I have to go a little bit with my, and let you see here. You see what happens if you block interleukin-17. From this huge concentration of neutrophils and monocytes in dermal fibroblasts, so the dermis, we have a strong reduction of this concentration and accumulation of inflammatory cells. Now, two drugs are almost ready in phase 3 studies. We're going to hear the results shortly. One is secukinumab, an interleukin-17 alpha inhibitor, that the data published and reported up to now show a strong difference in the HSPGA score, which is another not linear, but a system that allows you to see somehow the activity in a real mode. And you see the difference here between the verum and placebo. And we have another drug, bimekizumab, which is interleukin-17 AF. And they use the high score here. You see the high score is upregulated the effect in bimekizumab in comparison with placebo. And if you go to the even more stringent high score, 90% of the inflammatory lesions, the drug keeps still its effectiveness, and the placebo, of course, expected as less efficacy. But another story that I would like to consider as very more important for a cooperation between India and Europe is the fact that there are several molecules that are interesting to be developed for hidradenitis because at the molecular level, we call it drug repurposing, seem to be effective in disease, and they don't have any more patents, and they can be produced for third world countries, including Africa. And we see here, the more bold molecules we have, the more these compounds are associated with hidradenitis. And you can see very well that the drugs actually developing have almost full association, but there are also other drugs that we could not expect that they will be as associated as, and they have a good, let's say, doxycycline that we anyhow use, very good response to the disease. So this is a manner, the so-called drug repurposing, to recognize compounds existing that can be developed quickly and be used in areas that they cannot pay the amount of money needed for the new compounds under development. We speak about an inflammatory skin disease that can be healed. And this is because hidradenitis, in contrast to other inflammatory skin diseases, needs a combined treatment. And this is medical treatment and surgery. And if we see here, these patients that could go to surgery do not need to go to surgery because they can treat it very well by medical treatment. So we have to recognize who are the patients who need surgery. And we see here such examples, very deep scars that can be treated. Secondary would healing, excellent functional and cosmetic results. Combining the anti-inflammatory treatment and surgery. And also deeper combining vacuum treatment to accelerate wound healing. This is why the European guidelines have changed from the old ones that we could not differentiate inflammatory from non-inflammatory disease. Now we do it. We have the active inflammatory disease classified in mild, moderate, and severe by the IHS4 system, and the inactive non-inflammatory classified after Harley 1, 2, and 3 for the decision of surgery. And of course, a patient can change from the one to the other and have the combined treatment required. I think these new ideas that will be published soon allows us to better treat the patients at an individual level. What I told you today is that we need further drug development. This requires a better phenotypization of HS, especially in countries where this has been done, like India, and more and better defined translational data on the pathogenesis of this severe and enigmatic inflammatory skin disease. And if you would like to join us and learn by us and teach us, we have the next conference, the next European conference, the 12th conference of the European Hydroargenitis Foundation in Florence, Italy, February 8 to 10, 2023. And with this, I thank you once again for the great opportunity to discuss with you this very important disease.
Thank you so much, Professor Christos. I think you took us through the entire, spectrum of hidradenitis suppurativa. And I'd like to encourage the audience to please send us questions. We will take them up after the talk, by Dr. Adebola. So we'll take it together. So please do send us questions, and Naveen can copy and put them in the chat box here, right? Yes, so, yeah, thank you so much again, Professor Christos. And now I'm going to ask Dr. Adebola Ogunbi. She's going to speak about rosacea, new perspectives. But first of all, let me introduce you that Dr. Adebola Ogunbi is a well-known professor in medicine and dermatology at the College of Medicine, University of Ibadan at University College Hospital, Ibadan. And she also happens to be a very active member of IADV. She's a member of the International Affairs Committee of Eadv. In fact, she has also served as a member of the International Mentorship Committee of the International Society of Dermatology, where we have worked together. And she has a lot of other hats to wear. So with that, I'm going to invite you, Adebola, to speak about rosacea, new perspectives. I would like to ask the audience that please do send us your questions. We will be taking up a few questions on both Professor Christos's lecture as well as Dr. Adebola's lecture at the end of this. So please keep them ready. Thank you so much. Over to you, Adebola.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank Professor Christos for inviting me to take part in this webinar. A few years ago, Professor Wolina invited me, and then we wrote a book chapter on rosacea. I would also like to congratulate the Indian Association of Dermatovenerologists. 50 years is a lot. I mean, for those of us from other developing countries, we're really looking ahead to get to these landmarks as well. So I work at the University College Hospital, Ibadan in Oyo State. It's in the southwest of Nigeria. The University College Hospital happens to be the oldest teaching hospital in that area. And for this talk, I have no conflict of interest. Now, in terms of the new perspectives, I'll be talking mainly in dark skin, and the areas we'll be discussing will be under the epidemiology, a bit on the pathophysiology, emphasis on diagnosis, classification, and then treatment. I'd like to do this in about 20 minutes. So rosacea, I'm sure we have all come across patients that have rosacea. It's a chronic inflammatory facial disease. And typically the textbooks will tell you that it's characterized by flushing, transient and persistent facial edema, inflammatory papules, pustules, and telangiectasias. We know there's no cure for rosacea. It has periods of remissions and exacerbations. Now, the earlier reports we have kept emphasizing the fact that it was a problem of the fair-skinned individuals, particularly Fitzpatrick 1 and 2, and those of the Celtic and non-European heritage. However, we all realize that there are increasing reports of rosacea, especially in skin of color. And now we believe that rosacea is a global disease. However, you might have varying frequency in the different geographical areas. Obviously, the initial definition that had the erythema and the persistent facial erythema and telangiectasia would have excluded a lot of people with rosacea in darker skin types. Now, the epidemiology, there's been a lot of studies in the last 15 years, and now we're having a lot of studies on rosacea. it would appear that definitely it's a global disease. It manifests in different ways. So we have a meta-analysis by Eadv, where they had 32 studies. They studied 41 populations, and they had a total of 26 million individuals. They had 22 populations from Europe, 3 from Africa, 4 from Asia, North America, and South America. And the pooled proportion of individuals that had rosacea was about 5.46%. So we'll say the global prevalence of rosacea was about 5.46%, and 2.39 of those patients were from the outpatients in the dermatology clinic. So definitely rosacea is a condition that one has to think about. Now, in skin of color, like I said, a lot of times, and if you still read some of the textbooks, they'll tell you it's a rare disease in Blacks. However, there was a review by Alexis, which showed that the global reports, they had reported over 40 million cases of rosacea in skin of darker color. And in some countries, the had rates as high as 10%. And despite this, people still look at it as a disorder of the fair skin. So definitely we know that rosacea is a problem of the darker skin as well. Now, definitely the prevalence is not as high as that reported in the fair skin. We're not sure whether it's only because we're missing the report or there's some genetic associations, which we'll talk about. But however, there's a delayed diagnosis in the darker skin types for obvious reasons. When we talk about the darker skin types, we talk about Fitzpatrick starting from 4, 5, 6. Where I practice in Africa, we're majorly 5 and 6. And with the darker pigmentation, it is very difficult to see erythema macroscopically. Now, I looked at some few studies and I just put this for people to see. So Ghana, there were no cases of rosacea in Ghana. Ghana is next door to Nigeria. I hope that with more studies and global studies and collaboration, we'll really be able to find the true incidence, because they did not have any patients with rosacea in Ghana. In South Africa, the LOVA reported a prevalence of 0.2%. They had about 15 patients with rosacea. In Tunisia, we can see the figures. In China, they seem to have more. So it would seem like in Asia, they have more cases of rosacea. And my initial thoughts were that if we look at the Fitzpatrick skin type, it would seem that you have rosacea in the fairer, darker range than in the dark skin. And then we have the reports from America showing that they also have rosacea. So definitely, rosacea is a global disease. Now, one of the difficulties in really having a true figure of rosacea has been the screening tool and the case definition. So there's been a move towards a screening tool, which is called the ROSA screen by Tan and his colleagues, to actually have a case definition for rosacea, so that at the end of the day, we'll really be sure on the figures we have. Because as we see, rosacea can have different presentations. And if we don't have a uniform way of defining it, then we'll continue to have figures that would vary across, even within the same geographical area. Like I said, in Ghana, they don't have any. In Nigeria, we have a few. And then in other countries in Africa, they have a few. So we really need to use the ROSA screen, which has been shown to be highly sensitive and specific for picking up rosacea. Now, we all know that when we take a history from patients that rosacea, we have a family history. But recently, studies have been shown, and now we know that there's some genetic tendency in developing rosacea. So there was a study that used 275 pairs of twins, both maternal and fraternal twins. And it was shown that the severity of the disease can be accounted for by genetics and the environment. So definitely there's a trend towards a genetic tendency towards rosacea. And in the assessment of the genetic basis of rosacea by the Genome-Wide Association study, they were able to identify 2 significant single nucleotide polymorphisms which were associated with rosacea. That was in the European population, which was located between the HLA-DRA and the BTNL2. And we know that is also related to inflammation, which may be one of the reasons why there's a lot of inflammation in rosacea. And looking at histology slides, you can see there's also increased expression of both proteins in immunohistochemistry. However, there are no known gene mutations in skin of color. And I think these are areas of research. As we begin to identify more patients with rosacea, there'll be a need to identify the genetic tendencies in skin of color. And there's been a lot of talk recently about systemic associations in rosacea, which makes it very important. And we would need more studies to find out if it is true, because you have papers suggesting that rosacea is a systemic disorder. It has cardiovascular symptoms. Hypertension has been linked with rosacea. Gastrointestinal disorders has also been associated with rosacea. As we will see, Helicobacter pylori is one of the organisms that has been associated with it. But people have realized that patients with rosacea tend to have gastrointestinal disorders. Some of them have gastritis. Some of them have ulcerative colitis. And that's why people believe that it might actually be a systemic disease. Neurological disorders too have been figured out in patients with rosacea. Headaches have been reported, gliomas have been reported, complex regional pain syndromes, tremors have also been reported. But I would say that we need more studies to find out whether there's real associations with these disorders. Rosacea itself can be termed autoimmune, but it's also been associated with autoimmune disorders. And psychiatric disorders, especially depression, does occur in patients with rosacea. And recently, there's been a suggestion of the risk of cancer in patients with rosacea. So breast cancer now has been associated with rosacea. However, I think we will need more studies to be sure, breast cancer and then some hematological disorders. So we would need more figures, we would need more global studies to really be sure whether these are real associations with rosacea. Now, in terms of the pathophysiology, we know that it involves the immune system, microbes have been associated, neurovascular, and then the disturbed skin barrier. So with regards to immunity, we know that in rosacea, both the innate and adaptive immune reactions are there, and they are triggered by microbes. As we will see, microbes have been associated with rosacea, and the innate immune activation leads to upregulation of the toll-like receptors and protein-activated receptors, which are produced, we know, by the keratinocytes. And so you have the expression of the antimicrobial peptide cathelicidin, which is frequently activated to its bioactive form, the LL37, by the chylindrine protease, which leads to erythema, angiogenesis, and inflammation. We all know that the toll-like receptors involved can also elicit erythema, telangiectasia, and inflammation. This can be done by the various cytokines, chemokines, proteases, and angiogenic factors that are produced. The PAR2 activation also leads to inflammation, pruritus, and pain. And then you have more recruitment of lymphocyte neutrophils and degranulation of mast cells. And mast cells now are being figured as being important in the symptomatology of rosacea. And people are actually thinking whether mast cells, inhibiting mast cells may be helpful. The adaptive immune system is also affected in rosacea, and we know that the T helper cells, especially T helper 17 lymphocytes, have been found, and they're relevant immune mediators. So this just summarizes what you have in rosacea. You have the trigger, you have the bacteria. As we'll talk about microbes, Demodex also comes in, heat also comes in, and they are all known to activate different pathways. So we have those that would affect, I don't know if my pointer is showing, the toll-like receptors, the PAR, and at the end of the day, you tend to have inflammation, and then you have angiogenesis, which marks what you have in rosacea. We also see the effect of these cytokines and the effect of the vasodilatation, how it affects the vessel. So angiogenesis tends to be prominent in the pathogenesis of rosacea. Now, a lot has been said about microbes in rosacea, and Demodex tends to be one of the commonest that has been discussed, although we still have some papers which doubt the effect of Demodex. But the truth of it is when you treat Demodex with various things, which we'll talk about, you find out that there tends to be less inflammation. And so the effect of microbes in rosacea, Demodex still remains the one that is very popular. Staph, epididymis, people believe that it may be secondary, but in terms of precipitating inflammation in rosacea, Demodex comes in. And then it's also been found that the Bacillus aureus, which resides in the Demodex mites, also induces proliferation of the mononuclear cells, which further sets off inflammation. Now, there's been an association with gut microbes and stimulating inflammation in rosacea, and Helicobacter pylori seems to be the one that has been talked about. Recently, there have been papers that have shown that H. pylori is not related to inflammation and in rosacea. However, I feel that more studies need to be done because you have individuals that have treated patients with Helicobacter pylori. For us in Africa, the prevalence of Helicobacter pylori reaches about 90%, 98% in some countries. And it would seem that maybe this might not be part of the problem we have in Africa, but we would need more studies to actually look at the relationship between H. pylori and rosacea. Now, vascular hyperreactivity obviously is seen in rosacea, and we know that the hallmark is the erythema, the transient or persistent erythema that occurs. So one of the things that happens with the inflammation and the angiogenesis that goes on is that you have prolonged vasodilatation due to the various stimuli we have talked about. And that's why erythema tends to be prominent in rosacea. And then you also have dysregulation of the thermal mechanisms, which also leads to prolonged vasodilatation. It's also believed that the primary sensory neuron endings and keratinocytes may all be triggered, and you have responses leading to pain, flushing, and erythema. And so the summary of the vascular problem in rosacea is that you have abnormal facial blood flow, which presents as sustained flush and erythema. And this is quite important because for us in the skin type 6, this may not be seen. And although these are initiating reactions in rosacea, in the darker skin, you might have a delayed presentation. We also know that you have some neurovascular and neurogenic processes going on. And it's believed that the vascular reactions to the temperature, heavy exercise, ultraviolet radiation, spicy food, alcohol may be mediated through transient receptor potential, the TRP channel ions, the acronin 1, and then you have the vanilloid subfamilies 1 to 4 being associated with rosacea. And then you have other receptors which respond to external triggers, leading to release of vasoactive neuropeptides, substance P, and that's part of what gives the pain, the sensations you have. And then you also have sensory nerves, which may express the TLR2 and PAR2, and could also lead to inflammatory mechanisms. And that's why it is said that patients that have rosacea tend to have a sensitive skin. There tends to be a lot of stinging, there tends to be a lot of pain. So it's believed that all these chemicals stimulating these sensory neurons may actually play a part in the development of rosacea. Studies have been done in the darker skin, looking at the endothelial function and blood flow in response to heat, occlusion. And it was found out that when you look at what you have in the Asians, the Koreans, the Afro-Caribbeans, it was reduced. And it's believed that it's possible that this difference in ethnic response to the microvascular responses may be one of the reasons why flushing is actually reduced in the darker skin individuals, apart from the fact that the hyperpigmentation masks what you see. It's also believed that the skin flow is also reduced, and so erythema normally would not be prominent. Ultraviolet radiation also plays a part in stimulating the cells, and we all know that both UVA and UVB can induce vascular endothelial growth factor. And this has become important because when we talk about management, we now know that sunscreens are very important. In black skin, although we know that the melanin content offers some sun protection factor between 5 and 15, we also know that despite that, you might still need ultraviolet radiation. And it's been shown that even the darker skin types, that's the Fitzpatrick type 6, even when they're exposed to ultraviolet radiation, can actually have relapses. Now, all this leads to a disturbed barrier function, which is very important in patients with skin of rosacea, both in the darker skin and in the fair skin. And that's why patients with rosacea are described as having a sensitive skin. So you find out that there's increased transepidermal water loss, there's sort of dehydration. So you have reduced dehydration in the stratum corneum. And studies have compared what you have in acne and what you have in rosacea. And they have found that you have reduced surface lipid levels in patients with rosacea compared to those with acne. And that's what manifests as a dry skin that you have in rosacea. And then the increased levels of the serine protease in rosacea probably also worsens the barrier function. So patients with rosacea tend to have a compromised or a disturbed barrier function, which should be considered in management. Now, we all know that the original classification of rosacea in 2002 by Wilkin et al. They had 4 groups. So we had the erythematotelangiectatic variant, where you had erythema of the nose and most of the face, the cheeks bilaterally. Then we had the papulopustular, where they had some erythema, but they had papules and pustules. And then we had the third subtype, which is the phimosis, and then we had the ocular. Now, sorry. A lot of studies have gone on, and people have realized that there's a need to focus more and have other characteristics other than the first 4 we discussed, because you do have patients that could have combined features. And what has happened is over the years now, we talk about the primary features in rosacea, and we talk about the secondary features in rosacea. So we know the primary features are flushing, the non-transient erythema, you can have the papules and pustules, and then the telangiectasia. Now, the secondary features that come on, the stinging, the burning, the dry appearance of the skin, the edema, the ocular manifestation, and phimosis changes, they are secondary changes. And this has become important in the management of patients with rosacea. And so this is just pictures showing the typical erythema you would have on the nose in a fair skin, which is obvious, and then the papulopustules you can also have, but this patient also has involvement of, you have telangiectasia. And so classification of these patients then was grouped, it was not specific. And then we can see the lower picture where they have erythema in an Asian skin, type 4, type 5, the erythema is still visible. And then you have papulopustules. This study was done by Gallo et al. And then I got a slide of rosacea, the erythematotelangiectatic variant, which is, you can see the erythema on the face. Now, in the dark skin, especially the type 5 and 6, we can see that the dark skin prevents identification of erythema macroscopically. So the lady on my left, as you can see, she has the papules, and then she also has post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. The gentleman on the right also has some papules. He has the central aspect of the face involved. He has some hyperpigmentation. And what we have learned to do now is to use a dermatoscope. So when the patient comes in and the erythema is not obvious, with the help of the dermatoscope, you can actually see the telangiectasia, especially in the sites involved, which helps diagnosis. One of the things that helps us in the darker skin is that there are no comedons. So the patient comes in and you're wondering, is this rosacea? Is this acne? Because the telangiectasia is not there, the erythema is not there. I believe in the Indians, type 4, type 5, the erythema may be visible, but in the darker skin, you hardly see it. And so one of the things we look for are comedons. So one of the helpful distinguishing factors between rosacea and acne is the comedons. There are no comments. Now, some people have talked about post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. It is very common in type 6 individuals that have rosacea. I will show some reports in some type 4, type 5, they don't have post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. And this is important because when you read a lot of literature in the diagnosis of rosacea, people will say rosacea does not form scars. However, in the dark skin, you can have a bit of scars and then you can actually have post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. The other thing we can do is diascopy. We get glass slides if you don't have a dermoscope and you apply pressure and you can actually get the impression that there's some blanching because the vessels are there. So that can also be used when you do not have a dermatoscope. Now, one common form of rosacea that I read about that you have in India, and we also have a lot, is steroid-induced rosacea. So we had this lady, she's one of my patients, who had steroid-induced rosacea. She had used topical steroids for a very long time. One of the things we've noticed about the use of topical steroids, I don't know what happens in your practice, but in Nigeria where I practice, the patients don't own up. So you do not get a ready history of use of topical steroids. And when they come in, you're trying to find out what do they have. But this was a particular patient, she had rosacea, and after it cleared, she had post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. And it's very easy to see this kind of patient and wonder whether she has melasma because the presentation is also suggestive of melasma, as you can also have telangiectasia occurring in melasma. But we can see that the nose, her eyes, and the size of the face is also affected. So steroid-induced rosacea is a common presentation we see in Nigeria, and I guess it would be the same in Africa. Anywhere they're using steroid creams for lightening, you will tend to see patients that have these features. Now, one of the things that has happened is to try and standardize the classification of rosacea so that it can be helpful in terms of managing patients. So we talk about the phenotypes of rosacea. So rather than just have patients who have the 4 subtypes that we talked about, now they talk about the phenotypes so that the patients can be treated exactly for what they have. And so we see that it's broadly divided into the diagnostic features. We have the fixed centrofacial erythema, and then we have the phimosis changes. So when you have somebody that has that, then it's most likely rosacea. Now we have the major features, which is the flushing, the papules and pustules. You also have telangiectasia, and then you can have ocular manifestations. So if you have 2 of this, it is also highly suggestive of rosacea. And then we have the secondary features. I've talked about the burning, stinging sensation, edema, the dryness. These are all secondary features. But what is more important about this classification is that it ensures that you can address every aspect of the patient's complaint. So we have the Rosacea Consensus Group, that's the ROSCO, that came together to look at how could they improve a lot of patients that have rosacea in terms of management. And one of the things that they emphasized was that if you look at the original group we had, you actually have patients that could have the erythema, the ETR, and could also have the papulopustules. And then you could have a patient that has the phimosis group and also has erythema. So looking at the consensus group looked at it and said that the symptoms or the major features span across the different subtypes. So in terms of the phenotype, it is better to actually look at what are the signs and the symptoms that the patient presents with. So we know that from what we've been saying, diagnosis of rosacea is difficult in the darker skin types, especially when we are using the erythema, the telangiectasia, which may not be present. And so we know that phenotypic presentation is important. So once we have this in mind, we find out that in the terms of diagnosing rosacea for us, darker skin, we would focus on the issues that are relevant in making diagnosis. And one of the things that the ROSCO has also done is to ensure that the illness can also be graded, so that when you are choosing therapy, it can be based on severity of the illness. And there's an excellent review by Rashmi Shaka on rosacea in skin of color, a comprehensive review, which talks about management, treatment. And this is very small for us to read, but what I was trying to emphasize here is that you now have grading based on the subtype, you have the important clinical features, and then you have the grading, whether it's mild flushing, whether it's frequent flushing and severe flushing. So I can have a patient that has the erythematotelangiectatic type and has mild flushing, which might not be a problem for the patient, but I can have that same type of patient that has severe flushing. So in terms of management, I'll be able to treat the specific problem that the patient is complaining of. So diagnosis of rosacea in skin of color, we have similar symptoms like the flushing. A lot of times you might not see flushing in blacks. We actually hardly see flushing in blacks, but you get a history of warmth. So the patients may say they have this warm sensation on the face. You might have burning and stinging. And in darker skin types, we tend to have more of pruritus. So we might not have patients that have the burning, but pruritus tends to be common in our patients. The other thing is that the patient has had the symptoms for a very long time because the diagnosis has not been made. The other thing that helps in the history is that the patient has tried many medications for acne. So we talk about, you have a patient that has failed acne therapy. There's also, you could get a family history. And then you could also get a history of mixed heritage. So in other words, you have some intermarriage with areas where they have a higher prevalence of rosacea. And in the dark skin, you might have features concentrated on the central face, but you might also have the granulomatous rosacea, which occurs on the cheeks, around the mouth and the eyes, and you might not have that emphasis on the nasal area. And I have said erythema is noticeable with the dermatoscope, or if you take photographs and you have a blue background, it tends to be more obvious. Now, there are times you've had to do skin biopsies in our patients. And lab tests, we hardly do, but when it's appropriate, we tend to do it, especially when you have a patient that has rosacea and is presenting with other features like arthralgia, joint pains. You might want to do more investigations in that individual. I looked at an array of countries and looked at the symptoms in darker skin. So we found out that those in Saudi Arabia, their patients with rosacea tend to have pruritus rather than stinging, especially in those who have the severe erythematotelangiectatic form. And I think that is important. So we're not always looking for stinging. We might not get it in the dark skin. We might have more pruritus. And then they had more of the papulopustular rosacea. In Tunisia, they also had more of the papulopustular rosacea, followed by the erythematotelangiectatic type, and then they had rhinophima. In Korea, they had more of the papulopustular rosacea. In India, I got some case reports. I know rosacea and rhinophima from a study by, I think, Wolina and Scheimer. I think they had a prevalence of 0.5% in the dermatology consultations. But steroid-induced rosacea is increasingly reported in India. And then in South Africa, in their patients that were Fitzpatrick type 5, they had a bit of erythema. But patients that were type 6 showed just colored papules, skin-colored papules. They did not have any erythema. And the whole idea is for us to realize that the phenotypes of rosacea would vary across the darker skin and may vary across the geographical locations. Now, a lot of studies, there are a lot of excellent reviews on treatment of rosacea. And we know that in managing patients that have rosacea, patient education is very important. We also know that we have to individualize the patients. So triggering factors, we take a history for the known triggering factors. You might get flushing, you might not get flushing, and appropriate skincare. Now, in Africa, where I practice, there are a lot of people selling a lot of funny things for skincare. And that's why when the patients come to the clinic, we first take a history of the skincare. And there's this misconception of organic products or natural products. So people believe that using lime, for example, is natural, whereas it is quite irritating. And so we take a history on what they're using, because somebody that already has some disturbed epidermal barrier, you want to be ensure that they're using the appropriate skincare. We try to tell them to stop every other thing they're using. So we want to use pH-friendly cleansers. We want to use non-occlusive moisturizers. And then sun protection. There seems to be a lot of controversy here about the use of sun screens in the darker phenotypes. We still promote it, and we explain to people that if the endpoint is skin cancers, then we hardly have skin cancers. But if the endpoint is photoprotection, then with the dark skin also needs sun protection. And so we prefer the blocking types. And now there are a lot of tinted blocking sunscreen, so that can be used. And then camouflage can be encouraged. It improves the patient's quality of life. And then you now have the laser and the light therapy, which I'll talk briefly about. And in patients that are stable, you can do some chemical peels. Now, the triggers for the rosaceas, they are quite excessive. Some the patients will tell you, but the common ones are alcohol, sunlight, even hot baths, even the heat in the house, in the kitchen. You have patients who cook in the kitchen and they have triggers of rosacea, heavy exercise, emotional stress, spicy food. Now, the interesting thing about spicy food is we eat a lot of spicy food and it causes gastritic hyperhidrosis. But the few patients we have picked up with rosacea, there hasn't been any link. So I think it's still one thing we would need to look at, the issue of spicy food and rosacea, and then try and advise them on cosmetics to avoid, especially those containing formaldehyde. There's an excellent review of the standard management options for rosacea by the National Rosacea Committee. And one of the things they have done is emphasize the phenotypes that I talked about earlier and links them up with appropriate therapy. So for example, in patients that have persistent erythema, if the patient is bothered, you can now treat with bromonidine tartrate, which is an alpha-2 agonist. You also have oxymetazoline hydrochloride, which is an alpha-1. The first one is an alpha-2. This one is an alpha-1 agonist. So patients can have their erythema reduced. The problem with some of these drugs for now is that they cause a rebound, but they do not deal with telangiectasia for obvious reasons. But it can improve the quality of life. And in individuals that have papules and pustules, there's excellent reviews on azelaic acid, metronidazole. These are all topical medications, sodium sulfocetamide, ivermectin, and permethrin. And the last two have been known to clear Demodex. And we've had patients with improvement after the use of ivermectin and permethrin. And then depending on the level of the severity as well, you have systemic therapy. So carvedilol, one of the beta blockers, has been known to be useful for erythema and flushing. And in patients with papules and pustules, deoxycycline, minocycline, tetracycline, the tetracycline groups have been found to be interesting. And recently, clarithromycin has been found to be useful. People feel that it may help in clearing Helicobacter pylori. The issue is whether you want to use it alone or you want to use it in combination, because people are also worried about resistance. And then isotretinoin has also been found useful, and the combination of trimethoprim, sulfamethoxazole. The last one, we try to avoid it in where I practice, because we have patients that develop toxic epidermal necrolysis when they use sulfur-containing drug. So it's not one of the primary things we tend to use. Now, there are devices and ways that one can intervene surgically in patients with rosacea. So you have patients who their main symptoms are the persistent erythema. Then the intense pulse light has been found to be useful. The pulse dye laser has been found to be useful. And then potassium titanyl phosphate. So like I said, you can treat what bothers the patient, because there are a lot of patients that you see, they have this persistent erythema and people are asking questions. So now with a lot of studies, you can actually have treatment for these individual things. And for the papules, pustules, the different lasers can be used in combination, usually with the tetracycline groups. And in those with fibers, you can also use lasers, radiofrequency, and electrosurgery. And there is excellent reviews now, topical therapy, and what they do, and then the side effects. Now, going forward, there's still a lot of experimental drugs that are going on. And people are looking at combining different therapies. There were quite a lot of that available, but the reviews are available. And I found rifaximin interesting. Rifaximin is being suggested for the papules and the pustules. And then biologics. Now there are a lot of studies trying out biologics. Unfortunately for us, I was listening to the earlier speaker, biologics are very expensive for us in Africa. I guess in India, you're able to afford them, but biologics are also coming in. And then hydroxychloroquine has also been used. There's studies going on using hydroxychloroquine for rosacea, especially the papules and the pustules. We all know that the side effects of hydroxychloroquine, you can have retinal.
Sorry to interrupt, Adebola, we'll have to wind up a little quickly because you and
I am ending now.
Yeah,
I think I have the last slide. And then you have cosmeticals for rosacea. And just to let us know that you can have quality of life tools. It's very important when you're managing patients with rosacea to assess how it affects their quality of life. So the treatment in skin color is basically the same with other types, but one important thing is avoid post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation or take care of post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation. So in summary, rosacea is a global disease with varying geographical prevalence. Appropriate screening tools are needed for uniform case definition. The pathogenesis is multifactorial and a lot is going on because with better investigations like the PCR, a lot of microbes that they thought were linked with my rosacea, studies have shown that they are no longer linked. And the darker skin, you need a high level of suspicion, and new pharmacological therapy targeted towards symptoms have been found useful. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Adebola, for that lecture. You stop sharing the screen, then I'll just take the questions. That was really elaborate, and I think you covered all the entire spectrum globally. So that was a very good lecture on rosacea. Thank you. So there are a few questions, quite a few questions, but I will try to put them together. For Professor Christos, I think the questions have been there. Some he has actually answered in the chat box, but I don't know whether it's visible to the audience. So I'm going to request Naveen if he can copy and paste them in the audience boxes. But I will try to summarize and put them together. Professor Christos, there's a question which you've answered, but I'll just for audience benefit that, rifampicin plus clindamycin versus, doxycycline. Its usage in hydroargenitis suppurativa, and what do you do when there are recurrences? What is your preference, for that?
We know the problem of rifampicin in many countries, not only in North Africa, India, but also in South Europe. So we have made a European study, clindamycin rifampicin versus doxycycline, and we found similar efficacy. So we abandon more and more the combination. We use doxycycline, And we make another study showing that if you give clindamycin at a naive patient 5 days intravenously, at least in Europe as an inpatient, but you can do it also as outpatient, you have a 50% reduction of the lesions. So we have 5 days clindamycin as monotherapy, up to 3 months toxicity after that, if required, and only after that biologic. So this is what is going to be included now in the new guidelines in order to avoid the combination.
Okay, so there's one more question regarding the role of, laser hair removal in hidradenitis suppurativa. What are your comments on that?
There was a big hype on that. What it states nowadays is it's a good idea in very early stage lesions, but you cannot do anything as the lesions occur severe because it's a hyperreactive reaction. So if you start manipulating there, you may even worsen.
Yeah. So thank you so much. Then there is a question that has been coming again and again. We all know that there's a role of retinoids, but I think the audience has been asking that whether it is acetretin versus isotretinoin, which works the best. I can, of course, see your answer, but maybe for the audience benefit, if you could answer.
All retinoids are effective, but it's a matter of dose. In order to get the same result like acetretin, which is effective with isotretinoin, you need so high dose that you have huge side effects. So acetretin, yes, isotretinoin, no.
Okay, so I think that has answered your question. All the people who had this regarding isotretinoin versus acetretin. Then there was a question from Dr. Nidhi Sharma that, sir, can we do surgical local excision of inflammatory lesions in early stage 2 and then give medical treatment so as to reduce the drug duration rather than the opposite way?
We like the opposite way because first you reduce inflammation by medical treatment, and then making surgery, you reduce the recurrence rate significantly.
Okay, so that was one question. The other question, I think, which people are very interested in knowing is regarding the role of apremilast in hidradenitis suppurativa, because, apremilast, Dr. Christos, is used quite a bit in India now. It's one drug that has really caught up. So what are your views, on that?
It is an interesting anti-inflammatory compound. We use it in Germany very widely for Adamantiadis Behçet's disease or vasculitis, also in some cases with psoriasis. There are clinical studies ongoing, so I cannot tell anything at the moment because we don't have any data, but they will be ready soon.
Right, so I think that has answered the question. There's one more I'm trying to see because actually you have answered quite a few and he has posted most of the answers. I'm just looking at, I think there's one question regarding, the role of mast cells in hidradenitis suppurativa. So somebody's asked that, can therapy be targeted against the mast cells? Is anything, that is available, which of course they have suggested antihistamines, but is there something else that can be given in the treatment?
I think this was also a question for Rosacea. I think at least for hidradenitis, which was my turn, there is a lot of itching and mast cells are upregulated in the lesions. So actually you can use antihistamines, but it's only a symptomatic treatment. What you need is to reduce inflammation. And this will also make the mast cells leave the area. So we don't do a specific mast cell treatment, but we try to reduce inflammation as quickly as possible.
So thank you. There's one more question regarding the role of keratinocyte antimicrobial peptides, role of it in psoriasis versus hidradenitis suppurativa.
I can give you only one example. TNF alpha concentration produced by keratinocytes and inflammatory cells in hidradenitis 6 times more than psoriasis. So we have a lot of inflammation, both from keratinocytes and professional inflammatory cells in hidradenitis, which is not comparable with psoriasis. So we have a clinical relevance of the antimicrobial peptides in hidradenitis, which is not as strong as in psoriasis. So that we have 2 different diseases actually in the powerful inflammatory signaling, what we see.
So, Professor Christos, I think there's one more question regarding yeah, there was a question on the role of etanercept, whether that can be used at all in hidradenitis suppurativa.
One big study showing no effectiveness in contrast to infliximab adalimumab. Two reasons. One, etanercept is a TNF-alpha receptor binder, whereas the infliximab and adalimumab are TNF-alpha inhibitors. And as I have shown for interleukin-17 receptor, you need much more drug to block the receptor. So probably etanercept is effective, but the doses used, what we use for other diseases, are very, very low to show any effectiveness.
So thank you so much. You answered so many questions because you already answered many, which have been pasted, I think, in the chat box of the audience. And you were very patient to answer so many of them. So thank you, Professor Christos. And next, I don't see many questions on rosacea, but Adebola, I just wanted to ask you, as you said, rosacea is extremely difficult to see. In skin type 6, we all know that it's difficult enough in skin type, 4 and 5 when we are seeing it in the Indian skin, but maybe it is just a trifle better. So would you say that it's good, to use dermoscopy? But I think that it works well. So besides the telangiectasia, anything else that you would suggest to look for, or any other investigation besides dermoscopy that could be used to pick up rosacea in very dark skin?
Yeah, so like I said, you don't find comedons. That's the first thing we look for. So you have a patient who has come with all the pustules and there are no comedons. And then depending on when they have coming, for now, apart from the papules and pustules and the distribution, that is what we tend to use, the dioscopy. You have the telangiectasia on the sites of the lesions. So like in people having steroid rosacea, they have the telangiectasia all over the skin of the face. But then for rosacea, it's limited to the areas that you expect to have the lesions of rosacea. So that is also helpful. And in cases where we're not sure, then we biopsy. And we expect to have a granulomatous, usually we tend to have granulomatous histology in our patients.
There's one more thing that I often find when, doing the dermoscopy, sometimes you're able to see those little silver dots, and they are, when you look carefully, maybe just the tails, the shiny tails of Demodex. Once in a while, you're able to find that.
Okay.
So that was another interesting thing, which we found, with some of our residents. That was, but can't say that it's there in all the dermoscopy specimens.
Okay.
And I was very interested in hearing that you have, so much of post-inflammatory hyperpigmentation also in rosacea, which is not so much in India.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I think Carmen, you had your hand up. Sorry. Yeah. You wanted to say something.
Sorry. Yes, I'm fully aware that probably we are behind the schedule, but I have a very quick question to both our speakers. Of course, I thank them for their wonderful contribution to this session. Do we have any, let's say, take-home message, if there is some, about the photodynamic therapy in any of these two conditions?
Starting with hidradenitis, there are 2 clinical studies ongoing since long time. This does not allow me to have a lot of hope of them. I could imagine that we can reduce inflammation with light, but I don't see the clue at the moment.
Thank you.
I'm not aware of any studies for rosacea. I might need to check on that.
Yeah, even I'm not aware. I've not read. Yeah, Dr. Sham, also you had something to say.
Yeah, I had a question for Adebola. Adebola, you said that steroid-induced rosacea is a problem in your setup. We would like to know how you handle these patients. How can you elaborate on how you handle these patients of steroid rosacea?
So one of the first things we do is to try and get them off the steroids. And in a few patients, we found out that when we stop the steroids, suddenly they tend to have worsening of their inflammation. So in those that are using very strong steroids like clobetasol, we reduce the dosage gradually. So rather than say, stop using this topical steroids, we go from twice a day to once a day, and then eventually, and then we take them off the steroids. And then we begin to use benzyl peroxide. We found benzyl peroxide to be useful in some of the patients with steroid rosacea. And in some of them, we give them minocycline. So we begin to treat like regular rosacea, but we stop the steroids gradually.
So you wean them off gradually. You don't.
Yes, we do. Especially the clobetasol, because that tends to be the commonest steroid we have on the market for the skin lightening. It's the potent steroids.
Yeah.
And once we stop, the symptoms sort of rebound. So the patient comes in with pruritus and they don't like it. And so they go back on the steroids.
Are there any other topicals that you favor, especially in the beginning of the treatment, once you diagnose a steroid-induced rosacea?
Yes, we found topical metronidazole to be helpful. So we have used metronidazole. We have used azelaic acid. I was surprised that a few people had talked about azelaic acid causing hyperpigmentation, because for us, it causes more of hypopigmentation, and we actually tend to use it more for hyperpigmentation. So both metronidazole, azelaic acid, benzyl peroxide. We use our ivermectin orally. We don't use topical ivermectin, but we would do that for straight people that have rosacea. We just assume, and then we give them oral ivermectin. So that's what we tend to do. And then we're very careful on the skincare. So we take them off all the antiseptics, because one of the things we found out here is that a lot of the skin problems we have here is actually due to what the patients are using. So they use a lot of traditional black soap. It has a high alkaline. So we found out that once we're able to get the skin, like take off all the irritants, take off all the herbs, begin to use Syndets, stop the steroids gradually, introduce metronidazole. We can do that in the morning, and then we can alternate benzyl peroxide gradually, and then we start the oral treatment. They tend to do
azelaic acid works well, actually. You're absolutely right that topical azelaic acid is quite good, although it's not mentioned so much in the literature.
No, because many of us feel that in such patients of steroid-induced rosacea, especially when people have been abusing clobetasol, initially, the very initial stage of over a week, sometimes 10 to 14 days, is not to apply anything at all except for bland emollients, and not moisturizers at all. Because anything that you apply, especially benzoyl peroxide or any of the other topicals, may irritate an already irritated skin, which has also got a compromised skin barrier, thanks to all this medication. But anyway, thank you for your input.
I think it was...
sorry, Adebola, you're saying something?
The message was the same. You stop the steroids gradually. Yeah. I think that's the first thing, while they're going gentle on their skincare. And then usually within 2 weeks, we're able to start them. Maybe I gave you the wrong impression. We don't start them immediately on all these azelaic acid.
Right, exactly.
The skin can take it. Yes, but the only thing is that we learned that when we stop the steroids suddenly, they have a rebound of itching and stinging. So we stopping it suddenly, and we just tail it down gradually. And then within 2 weeks, we're ready to start gradually to treat.
Of course. Thank you.
So I think, if we've covered all the questions. In fact, I clubbed the questions together, and we've done quite well. We learned so much about the EADV organization, what all goodies to expect, and what we could also offer from IADVL. I'm sure Dr. Shyam Verma and I will draft a letter, send them the proposals. And they're excellent lectures, Professor Christos and Professor Adebola, on both hidradenitis suppurativa and rosacea. We learned a lot. We discussed quite a bit. And of course, Professor Carmen, it was wonderful having you with us because you took us through the entire journey of the Eadv. That was really wonderful. Thanks once again to Dr. Shyam Verma getting us together. Thank you, Dinesh. Thank you to the audience because you've been a very good audience because you attended 2 programs today. And, we had more than nearly 300 people, because on a Sunday evening, that's quite a good number because there is so much to watch, otherwise here and there. So I'm sure you gained a lot. You'll become members of Eadv if you have to choose, 2 or 3 societies that I said. And we look forward to meeting you and taking some of these wonderful initiatives forward. Remember that this was in the 50 years of IADVL, the golden jubilee year of IADVL. So thank you so much. I will just turn it over to Dinesh to close, the session.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Just a second, please. Just sorry for interrupting. I think we need on a slightly lighter note, Carmen needs to be thanked for playing 2 roles. I mean, answering questions for 2 people. So she's done a wonderful job. She was supposed to be sharing, just a few things, and we were depending on the president to have been there, but for I don't know, there must be some pressing urgency. But thank you for covering ground so much.
I thank you for your support and for having me today. It was really a pleasure and an honor, and I really hope to work together in the future. Looking forward for that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, I echo everybody's sentiments. So it was a very enriching session and excellent talk by the speakers, and also a beautiful insight we got through of Eadv through Dr. Carmen. So we are very grateful for it. And we look forward for having much more academic partnerships between IADVL and Eadv. So, and also we would love to host you, as our president had told, at Dermacon International Mumbai 2023. So if possible, I hope we would be able to see some of you in person. I would thank Dr. Shyam Verma, the chair of the International IADVL, and also Dr. Rashmi Sarkar, our president, for making this event possible. And my thanks goes out to Dr. Carmen, Secretary General Eadv, Professor Christos, and Professor Eadv for your valuable presence. Thank you all once again. Take care, stay safe. Let's hope to meet up soon.
Yeah. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just one request. If Professor Christos, if he's able to switch on his camera.
I'm switched off by your administrator.
Okay, that's fine. I think we have something. I just thought we would take just a farewell pic, but
I think I took a picture, if I'm not mistaken. Did I send you? I did try in the initial part. Yeah,
so now I'm switched on.
Yeah, just the last one. Yeah, smiles, please. Yes, and I forgot to thank Medinate and Naveen for their technical support. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.